Hello. My name is Alexey Redizubov, and I'm going to give you an unveiling session. There are some things that are already sitting in our heads and seem so obvious that we cannot even assume that behind this obviousness there is something absolutely unbelievable. I want to expose one such obviousness right now. To show that, in fact, we know practically nothing at all about the world we live in. Because this obviousness is only one of a huge number of such obviousnesses, but it entails so many things. Well, anyway, to the point. You probably know the parable of the Good Samaritan. Let me explain for those who don't know it at all. There is a Bible. The Bible is divided into the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the Hebrew Bible. It begins, by the way, with the first 5 books, which are called the Pentateuch of Moses. Or, in other words, the Law. The Law in Hebrew is the Torah. This Torah is written in a scroll. Look at what such a scroll should look like. The Old Testament was once written by the Jews. Then comes the New Testament. This is the coming of Christ and the stories associated with it, the 4 Gospels, and then it's all in one book, and it's all called the Bible. What are these stories about? Well, religion, faith. Okay, everything that has developed around them over the last centuries and millennia, we know that. But what is it really about? We created the Search for Lost Meaning project, and we give answers to these questions there. And here is the story of the merciful Samaritan. Where does the story come from? From the New Testament. It is a story that Christ tells. Christ loves to tell stories, he tells parables. When he is asked something, he says, "And I'll tell you a parable," and he tells it. Here is one of those parables about the Samaritan. There was a disciple who asked Christ, "How do you live forever?" To which he replied, "How do you read the law?" "Well, the law is the Torah." To which the man said, "How do you do it?" "Here, love God, and then love your neighbor as yourself." To which he replied, "You read right." And the disciple asked again, "So who is the neighbor? Whom to love?" And here's where the interesting part begins. Christ answers him with a parable. He says, "I will tell you a parable about a certain man who was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on the way robbers attacked him, stripped him, and left him almost half dead. And he lay there. And a Levite walked by and passed by. And then a priest walked by and passed by. And then a Samaritan passed by, picked up the man, took him to the inn, fed him, treated his wounds, and then, as he was leaving, left 2 denarii to the innkeeper to keep him safe." And the parable ends with Christ asking the disciple, "Well, is that clear now? Well, who has shown him mercy?" To which the man says, "Yes, of course I understand." Well, that's what you do. It's an interesting parable, because, first of all, there are many details. Why did he go from Jerusalem to Jericho? Why did not just people pass by, but a Levite, a priest? Why was it necessary to give the money to the innkeeper? To all this we can answer. And just like that, why not leave it? Why not, after all, a good Samaritan help the one lying by the roadside? That is, a great text is seriously supposed to tell some kind of 3rd-grade story about how you have to be kind when the rest of us pass by, and you make sure to help. And all the other details that are there are just there to create some kind of literary background. And why don't we fill it with details, completely unnecessary, by the way? Think about it. Do you really believe that Christ, who came, who then gave his life, was supposed to tell a story about eternal life, like don't pass by, give help, and everything will be all right. If it were that simple, Armenian radio wouldn't be doing it. What is this story really about? And who are these Samaritans? What are they talking about anyway? The Samaritans are an amazing people. On the one hand, we all know about them from the parable of the Samaritan, from the fact that they are recorded in the Old Testament itself, but who are they? Now the Samaritans are a nation of 900 people, but in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, there were 150 people. And we know from history that there never seemed to be more. That is, their number has always fluctuated around a few hundred. It's amazing stuff. We know that there are nations, there are countries, and here is a small group of people. But people who are mentioned in the Bible itself and who lived thousands of years later. And what is the amazing thing about these people? And these people have, it turns out, their own Torah, their own scroll, which they have been rewriting for 2,000 years. So this Pentateuch, it exists. Let me explain. The Old Testament was originally written in ancient Hebrew. The scroll written in ancient Hebrew is arranged in the form of pieces of parchment, that is, pieces of leather, cloth, which are wound on rollers and form a scroll. And this is the canonical view of the scroll, just the way it should look. Two rollers, the discs of these rollers, the drawings on these discs. And the text, written in ancient Hebrew, the text is very interesting. It is written in consonantal script. By the way, now that Hebrew has been revived in Israel, has become a spoken language, they still write it the same way. Consonant text does not use vowels. When a Hebrew text is written down, vowels are omitted. Only consonants are left. Well, naturally the question arises, well, how about if we write only consonants? Will there be collisions when the same written word can be read differently? Yes. There are special techniques for this. There are letters, matrix lectiones called, in Greek, mothers of reading. This is when consonant letters are used to record vowels. Here for writing the Old Testament, 4 such consonant letters were used, mothers of reading, which, where it was not clear how to write a word correctly, could be written down. This was unnecessary because if the meanings of words are clear from the context, you can omit them. But where ambiguity arises, you can write this matrix lectiones and explain how the word is pronounced correctly. Explain the consonants, but that will act as vowels. So that's an interesting form of writing. Naturally, the Old Testament uses these matrix lectiones to explain what and how. Now, there are 2 sources for this Old Testament. More precisely, the Pentateuch. 2 sources that are written in Hebrew. They are the Hebrew canonical text and the Samaritan Pentateuch. Both are written in Hebrew. It differs in the form of writing, it is written in Hebrew, but it is written in different ways. Yes, there are also translations. Well, the best known is the Greek translation of the Septuagint. The Latin is the Vulgate. But translations are still translations. The original text is the one in Hebrew. And so it turns out that it is the Samaritan Pentateuch that differs from the original in its comprehensibility. In the Samaritan Pentateuch in Hebrew, there are conjugated combinations, when words are written together, expressing the genitive relation. For example, king's house, mother-in-law's apartment. Such words are written together and, if you want, you can separate them, write them separately. So, naturally, the joined writing generates another ambiguity. How to divide them properly. You can divide it this way, you can divide it that way. This is usually clear, again, from the context. And here is the difference of the Samaritan Pentateuch. In it the conjugated combinations, many, are divided so that it is clear how it is spelled, so that no misreading arises. And where matrix lectiones is lacking and it is unclear how to read, they are inserted. It was the Samaritan Pentateuch that I had to work with a lot at one time. It always amazed me. This kind of careful attention to the text, where the text is tweaked and it is indicated how it should actually be read. Now the situation with the text of the Old Testament in general is interesting. From the 7th to the 9th century, the Masoretes worked on this text. These were the scholars who figured out how to write the vowels for the biblical text. These dots that are placed next to the consonants and, accordingly, indicate the vowels. And here they were putting vowel signs. How to read this text correctly. Now let's go back 900 years from these Masoretes to the time when Christ appears. When the legend of Christ appears, when the Gospels appear. And what does it say about the Samaritan? Look, there is an original text, a brilliant text, in which there are 4 meanings, 1 external and 3 internal allegorical, which carry a terrific story. About history, about writing, about meaning, about the amazing things that humanity has figured out and encoded into this text. But to read it correctly, you have to get the vowels right, you have to read this text correctly. And the text is designed so that you can only read it correctly if you understand what it is about. And the text is designed so that since there are 3 hidden meanings, depending on which hidden meaning you are now reading, the context changes and you can read the same words differently. But naturally, those who are not in the context have a tremendous desire to correct errors, to write down the text in an intelligible way, to help that text. So what is Christ talking about? The Word of Scripture, the words of the Bible went from Jerusalem to Jericho. Suppose from the beginning of the text to the end. And the scribes took that word, the robbers, and they stripped it, they took away its vowels. They took away his clothes and left him half living. The consonantally written word is half living because there is no life in it yet for it to have life. You have to add vowels there. In other allegories it is always to add water. Water has always denoted vowel sounds. Add water, and it lives. Living water and dead water. And so that leaves this word written down so intentionally, because that's the intention. And a priest walks by and does nothing, and a Levite walks by. We'll have a separate conversation about Levites, and does nothing. And there is always a Samaritan who will take back the word, put it in an inn, give him money to keep it alive. Do you feel what we're talking about? The conversation is about the Samaritan Pentateuch, that there is this Pentateuch, which corrected the obscurities and errors, and which helped these travelers by clothing them and, moreover, by carefully rewriting them. This Samaritan Pentateuch has survived to this day, being rewritten. You look, here it lies, and through the fact that it is now preserved and is there, we can understand these parables that were recorded then, 2,000 years ago. It's an interesting story. And now, if you take the details like this, notice, because it all starts with a question. How to live forever. And what is to live forever? And to live forever is how a text does not lose its meaning. How can a text not become distorted? To keep the text from getting distorted, you don't have to correct it. How can the text not become distorted? The first question, as Christ answers, says, "How do you read the law?" Watch this little detail. For as soon as one is asked how to live forever, Christ answers, "How do you read the law?" How do you read this scroll? How do you read the Torah scroll? Of course. How do you read? How do you put vowels in there? What vowels do you put in? And he answers, how is that possible? I read love God, love thy neighbor. Yes. God says, right, read from the context, from that understanding and not trying to bring something of your own extra into this text. And then there's the parable of the Samaritan, see? And here are the details. Somehow a priest passed by and a Levite passed by. The priests were the ones who could carry the Ark of the Covenant. And if you've watched my other videos, you already know that the Ark of the Covenant is an allegory of the same Torah scroll. These handles are the rollers of the Torah, which are also the poles with which the Ark is carried. And so the priests carry this Ark. And there are Jews and there are Levites. And for some reason the Levite passed by. And who are the Levites? And now it turns out that by getting caught up in the story of the Samaritan, we get to an incredible layer. You know, this is the story of the Old Testament. This is the second book of the Old Testament, Exodus, which describes how Moses leads the nation of Israel, the nation of the Jews, leads the Jews out of Egypt. He takes the Jews out of Egypt, and when he takes them out, it turns out that there are not just any Jews, but about 600,000 souls. And so these 600,000 souls walk through the desert, constantly being counted, and there are always 600,000 and pennies left. And here is this pertinent question. Why does the same number remain all the time? And what do these 600,000 mean anyway? And interestingly enough, if you ask the rabbis what these 600,000 mean, you sometimes hear from them a very interesting opinion that there is an incredible coincidence. There are 600,000 letters in the Torah scroll itself, in the Torah text itself. 600,000 letters and 600,000 Jews. And the rabbis also say that the Messiah will appear when the Savior comes, when all those 600,000 Jews come together again. There's a catch. If we take and count the number of signs in this Torah scroll, there are about 302,000 and pennies. Here are 302,000 signs. And 600,000 Jews. Yes. But the writing is consonant. And if we count everything, including the vowels, there are 602,000 letters. It turns out that if we count those very unrecorded vowels, there are exactly as many letters as there are signs, well, not signs, but pronounced sounds in the Torah scroll. It's already an amazing coincidence. And now this Messiah will come when all 600,000 Jews are gathered together, takes on a very different meaning. It means that when this scroll is read correctly, then it will happen. Well, you have to ask me now, how do you prove that the 600,000 Jews who came out of Egypt are the same? Well, yes, and let them always be the same number. Yes, it is clear that when you rewrite a scroll, it must always copy the original text exactly, and not one letter or one line in it shall be changed. The Jews regulate the rewriting of the Torah by separate laws and rules. And there's even a parable where one rabbi came to another rabbi and asked, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm rewriting the Torah scroll right now, aren't I?" The rabbi says, "Yes, that's a very responsible thing to do. He says, be sure to concentrate, because one little line, written incorrectly, can destroy the whole world." Yes, he says, "I'm really worried." He says, "If you're worried, then you should only write when you are completely sure of yourself." He replied that I am sure of myself, but there are so many flies at home, and the ink takes so long to dry. Yes, you can't change a single letter, because then the plot would be broken. Because there is a fourth book of the Pentateuch called Numbers. And this book lists the 12 tribes of Israel, and how many people are in them, and how they are to stand next to the tabernacle, and how they are to form a structure. And if you look at how many, if you look at how they stand, then it turns out that it describes the arrangement of the people on the Torah scroll. And the arrangement itself around the tabernacle is a spiral wrapped up just like the scroll wrapping the roll. But that's still not proof, is it? Even if it fits the number of people, even if it is all very similar. But there are Levites among these Jews, about 20,000 of them, who are supposed to be Aaron's helpers. Aaron is the brother of Moses. Moses is the one who led the Jews out of Egypt. And when God said to him, "You will carry my word and you will tell about me." And Moses said, "How can I tell the story if I can't speak? I'm a slow talker." And he said, "Well, you don't have to. You have your brother Aaron to speak for you." In these allegories, Moses is Hebrew, he is writing, he is a written text, and he really can't speak. But there is Aaron, it is the ability to read this written text. It is oral language, which is the brother of written language. And that oral language is what will tell this text when you read it. And so to this Aaron, God says, "I will give you helpers, Aaron, Levites, and they will serve you." And then it says that there must be 22,000 Levites. And we must take these Levites from the different tribes, so many from each tribe. Look, how wonderful it is. You have to take so many of them from each tribe. Now, if you count how many matrix lectiones are in this scroll, it turns out that there are exactly 22,000 of them. When they talk about the Levites, who will be Aaron's helpers, they talk about the mothers of reading, the very letters that are supposed to clarify the vowels where it is ambiguous to read. Where it is unclear, the Levites, matrix lectiones, are supposed to help read correctly. But this is not yet proof. The proof is coming now. When God explains to Moses how to properly count the Jews, he says, he gives the total number. And then he says, when you are going to count, don't count the Levites in that number. Count the Levites separately. And what does that mean? If we count the number of consonants and the number of vowels, we get exactly the same 602,000. But if we also count these mothers of reading, we will not get the sum, because we will count twice the vowel and the matrix lectiones, with which it is written as a consonant, as a sign. Therefore, when counting the total number of letters, one should count the number of consonants, the number of vowels, and the number of matrix lectiones should not be included. This is exactly what the book of Numbers says. This instruction is exactly what God gave Moses word for word. When you count, count everyone except the Levites, whom you exclude from this number and count separately. Look, if this is not proof, what is? Let's go even further. After all, going back to the Samaritan story, let's go further. First of all, there is a sequel. There, in the New Testament, Christ meets a Samaritan woman. A Samaritan woman meets her and asks her for a drink of water. And you remember I said that water is an allegory of vowel letters. And Christ himself. Oh, of course, you can't talk about such great things in such a crumpled way, but nevertheless. And Christ himself is an allegory of a Torah scroll that comes into this world, comes with its own understanding. And then what happens to her? Read the gospel, it's all written there. And so this scroll comes to this Samaritan woman and says, "Give me water to drink, give me vowels." She said to him, "Well, how come? We have such a tradition. We Samaritans don't trade with you Jews. We do not give you water." And Christ answered and said to her, "Woman, if you knew who I am, you yourself would have asked me for a drink of water. Now, I hope you understand what this is all about. More details. The traveler was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. Well, Jerusalem, you all know, that's where the whole Jewish world starts. It is the beginning of Israel. And I will assume that Jerusalem is the beginning of the Torah scroll. It's the beginning of the scroll. And the word went from the beginning of the scroll to the end of the scroll. To Jericho. So why is Jericho called the end of the scroll? What do we know about Jericho? The book of Joshua is where it was stormed. When the Jews came to Canaan and decided to take it. First there were the spies led by Joshua, and then there was the assault on Jericho, with which the conquest of Canaan began. And the Jews came to Jericho, and the walls were great, insurmountable walls, and then the Jews walked in circles around this Jericho. 7 times they went in circles and carried the Ark of the Covenant with them. The priests carried the Ark of the Covenant around Jericho around its walls and blew trumpets. And when they went around, the walls collapsed and Jericho had no walls. What are we talking about? The walls of Jericho. There are 2 rolls, where it begins and where it ends. More precisely, first the entire text, the entire parchment is wrapped around, relative to me, the right roll. On this right roll is the whole text. These are the walls that surround Jericho. And when we read this text, and what is the reading of the text? Trumpets. The trumpet voice that goes off is the voice of the reader saying these very recorded words, properly adding vowels to them. And so the rollers of the scroll rotate. What's going on? The Jews, the text, the letters, go around the walls of this roll, around Jericho, and carry the ark behind them. The ark is the scroll is the ark being carried around the walls of Jericho. And with each pass the walls, what happens? Are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And when we make all the necessary turns, the walls of Jericho fall. There are no more walls. The book is read. There's 1 roll left. And by the way, that's what it says. When Jericho was taken, all the people of Jericho were slaughtered. That's the reason why there's no one left there. Well, really, except for 1 widow. The widow who sheltered Joshua and the spies. Look how nice, yes. Here's the Torah roller with nothing left on it. The same one that once sheltered in fact the whole text, Joshua and the spies. That's all he is left with, a lonely widow, from whom everyone has left. This is how this text should be understood. That is why the traveler goes from Jerusalem to Jericho. And so around this story, where everything is beautiful, where every detail plays, sounds, has its meaning. Suddenly there is a completely superficial interpretation that you must be merciful, and then you will have eternal life. Well, of course, if you approach any allegorical, polysemantic text this way, everything will be perfectly clear, everything will be perfectly simple. But you will never find the essence in this way. And so our ancestors left us clues. First of all, it's the text itself. They left us clues. And those clues are sometimes incredibly surprising. Let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning. There are Samaritans, of whom there are always several hundred, who rewrite the same book, the same scroll, the wrong scroll. Never agreeing with what the Jews have. Remember the anecdote when a man died and stood before God and asked, "Tell me, Almighty," he said, "what was the meaning of my life?" He said, "Well, what was it? In 82, did you go to Sochi on vacation?" He said, "Yes, I did." So on the 3rd day you were sitting in a restaurant, the woman at the next table asked you to pass her salt. He says, "Well?" He says, "So you did." So? There you go. Do you realize that this anecdote is a Samaritan anecdote? No one knows where jokes come from. The origin of anecdotes is a mystery. There are anecdotes, they have no authors. But this is a separate topic of conversation, where all these stories without authorship come from historical parables, anecdotes. Nevertheless, do you see where I'm going with this? That the Samaritans are not just some people who, well, dwarfed and survived. It was the original intent that their Samaritan Pentateuch was originally written with such intelligible things as an intelligible book. Because it was clear that they would want to bring clarity, order, that they would want to kill the polysemantic text, which, in fact, is what happened with the Masoretes, who inserted their vowel signs and thereby killed the normal reading of this text. You can no longer, when everything is nailed down, understand, well, I won't say most of it, but the essential part about what's written there can only be understood if you really turn to the original Hebrew text. And so in order to give us this message, which, on the one hand, is recorded in the Old Testament, where the Samaritans were given a good role, when they were building the Second Temple, they couldn't build it for a long time because they were getting in. Samaritans with their advice and shouted that we want to take part in the construction. Without us there would be no way. And until they were pushed aside, the temple wasn't built. Can you guess what the allegory is about? Then in the New Testament there is the parable of the Samaritans, there is the story of the woman. This is all a message to us so that we can understand this principle and understand how to read. But so that we could really decipher this message, we left a group of guardians whose job it was to give us the salt. You see, whose job it was to preserve this Samaritan scroll, so that we could now understand what the message was about. I would never have deciphered this story if I hadn't had to work with the Samaritan Pentateuch for a long time. When I was deciphering the text of the Old Testament, of course, I took all available sources. The main one, of course, is the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish text, and the Samaritan Pentateuch. And I always had the two texts in front of me. I saw this difference, I couldn't figure out what it was. And if I didn't have it in my head, I don't think I'd be able to tell you about the Good Samaritan right now. This story of the Good Samaritan has many more implications. It still pops up in many places. And all these robbers show up afterwards. You won't even believe it, they appear in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Exactly these, as Hamlet said about them, and the robbers were extremely merciful. Now I want to draw your attention to our project called The Search for Lost Meaning. And pay attention to this book, The Origin of Meaning, which describes many mysteries, leads you to the point where you can find answers and describes the answers. But at the same time it gives you the opportunity to test yourself and try to solve these ancient puzzles. And then everything is traditional. If this video interested you and you liked it, please like it, write comments. And if possible, of course, tell others about it. Thank you. Goodbye.